Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was at the Western Premiers Conference Wednesday and Thursday. Her message was Uniting the West for Economic Strength, by which she means building oil and gas pipelines and resisting federal regulation that affects Alberta's oil and gas industry. How did she fare? Well, British Columbia is key because new pipelines to the West Coast that serve Asia affect BC's left-leaning NDP government. To assess Smith's performance, I talked to political scientist Duane Bratt of Mount Royal University. Welcome to the interview, Duane.
Happy to be here, Markham.
Okay, so we had the Western Premiers Conference over the last 2 days. Premier Danielle Smith attended. What was her agenda there?
Her agenda was getting support from the other premiers, the territorial leaders, for pipelines, so that they will have a united front when they meet up with Mark Carney at the full premiers meeting, I believe in about a week and a half in Saskatoon. She obviously walked in with allies, Scott Moe being the most important. But there was always an issue about David Eby and how Eby would respond. Bear in mind, there have been clashes between BC and Alberta over TMX, over Northern Gateway, and it doesn't matter what party it was. So Christy Clark fought Alison Redford. John Horgan fought Rachel Notley and fought Jason Kenney. And David Eby launched the attacks for Horgan on TMX. So Smith walks in hoping to do this. And she's got some cards on the table in the fact that there is growing support for pipeline development in Canada as a response to Donald Trump. The weakness she had walking into the meeting was all of this discussion about Alberta separatism. And so I was very interested to see how that would play itself out. And I think at the end of the day, Smith got a pretty good commitment from the other premiers. Even Eby was holding his tongue, saying, well, there is no project going through BC. When there is a project, then we'll talk. But until that point, we'll support the other aspects. We're just not convinced about this oil pipeline. But because there is no project, because there is no commitment from the federal government, we're not going to stand in the way at this moment.
Duane, maybe you can clarify something for me. Smith has been saying that, well, I'm not a separatist. I'm just using this as leverage against the federal government. And it seems to me, as soon as you say that you're using something for leverage, you lose the leverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And polling doesn't help her. If you've only got 18 to 19% hardcore separatists, and the rest, even to get to 30 to 35, is if you get a pipeline. So if you're going to go to Mark Carney and say, if you do not build me a pipeline, then separatism is going to rise from 18 to 34%. That's not a big threat. If she walked in and says, if you don't build me a pipeline, separatism goes to 65 to 70%, that's a threat. And when you acknowledge publicly over and over again, and this is the beauty of Danielle Smith, is she's unfiltered. She's like a Bond villain in that she identifies the plan to you. And it was, well, if I get what I want, separatism dies. If I'm sitting in that room, I'm going, so is this an ultimatum to us? Or are we in a negotiation? Or is that the hammer that you're throwing out at us? But it's not surprising that they ended up getting a consensus with an asterisk, a consensus of the premier's meeting. Those often occur in a premier's meeting. And Danielle Smith is very good in small groups. She can make her case in a very charming way. And obviously it worked. But she was also pushing against an open door with the other premiers who have all come out in support of this for different reasons. I mean, the northern leaders want a deep water port for a variety of reasons. They want economic development for a variety of reasons. Scott Moe supports everything that Danielle Smith stands for. And Wab Kinew is a conciliatory at his nature. So the big question was around Eby, and Eby basically said, I'll agree because there's nothing tangible right now.
What are we seeing out of British Columbia? I mean, that's where I'm based. And what I'm hearing, kind of, and this is anecdotal evidence, but what I'm hearing on the street is, "Ooh, I'm not sure about that pipeline. I don't like the idea of another one going through it, but it's not organized yet because there isn't any a proposal or anything."
Yeah,
So, does that give EB room to be, move a little bit?
yeah, it does. And I you have to be careful about polls showing there is wider support for pipelines at this moment in time without a project. And I tell that to the nuclear energy advocates all the time. And they go, well, look at the growing support for nuclear energy. I go, yeah, until there's a project. Once a project comes, then you'll see opposition. And so, and the other thing is pipelines take a long time. uh, and that gives time. So there is a moment now, but the process goes on for so long that there is an opportunity to intervene.
Well, what about this?
And I will throw one other aspect at this
Sure.
that made the premier's meeting complicated is because in her video address on May 5th, she outlined a set of strategies of what Alberta was going to take. And the first one was bilateral negotiations between Ottawa and Alberta. In other words, the provinces were on the sidelines. So she goes, I'm going to negotiate unfettered access to Tidewater solely with Mark Carney. And if I'm BC, I'm going, well, wait a minute. Don't we have a seat at the table? And then all of a sudden, they do have a seat at the table, and Danielle Smith is going to have to explain that. So I want to know how those conversations occurred.
Yeah, that seems very odd to me because in the past, I would have thought that comments like that would have raised hackles with other premiers. And maybe it's just the zeitgeist, the moment.
Yeah, the Canadian patriotism, there is some sympathy right now for Alberta's position only because of Donald Trump. Bear in mind, everything that Smith is saying, she was saying for years. Jason Kenney was saying for years. So this predates Donald Trump, but he has changed the conversation in this country. And that's giving her an opportunity. And as I think I said in the last interview I gave with you, I think she's blowing that opportunity by trying to bypass the other premiers and working directly with the federal government. Hopefully, this meeting in Yellowknife shows a change in strategy on Smith's part.
Duane, my take on her strategy is that it's kind of loose and complicated, and there's lots of moving parts, and sometimes there's a wrench gets thrown in the works, and it kind of, I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like a
Well,
strategy.
there's an overall theme to it, which is the expansion of the oil and gas sector. Every one of her demands is about oil and gas. Um, and I think we've talked about this before. She's still an oil and gas lobbyist at heart, as premier of this province. So the overall theme that's pretty apparent. But you keep having to fact check everything that she says. So the whole debate about what ended Energy East, what ended Northern Gateway, it will not go away. Um, this idea that there was $500 billion of investment that pulled out of Alberta um, under Trudeau. A lot of those are imaginary numbers about, well, we're thinking of doing this, now we're not. It's the same way that Donald Trump comes back from the Middle East going, I've got $5 trillion worth of investments in my pocket. No, you don't. So that's a problem. The overall theme, I think you can understand. Even some of the strategy and tactics, you can understand where her motivations are. But a lot of the facts and numbers they just don't add up. And even the Prince Rupert pipeline that she keeps talking about, poor Andrew Leach keeps having to tell her the proposal was always Kitimat. Kitimat is not the same as Prince Rupert. Maybe it is in Alberta. It's this northwest thing over there. But there's a big difference between Kitimat and Prince Rupert. And the fact that she can't wrap her head around that, I think, is a bit worrisome.
Well, what Leach has done, just for viewers who aren't familiar with what he's posted on X, is he simply screenshot from a document that Enbridge, the proponent, had put out that said we looked at the two routes, one to Kitimat and then Prince Rupert, which is 230 kilometers north, and the Prince Rupert was simply too challenging geographically and technically. And so
Yeah,
we took Kitimat. And so what do you say to that? I mean, you can't get over geography. You can't change it.
yeah, and there's 200, as you said, kilometers between them. That's a big difference. And if you keep going on about the history of Northern Gateway, would you not know that Northern Gateway was going to Kitimat? I remember being on this broadcast show where they were interviewing Alison Redford, and the fact that she was born in Kitimat, was a major aspect of this.
She knew where Kitimat was.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
Well, look, the other theme that comes out of this is the trying to organize Western premiers against federal overreach.
Yeah.
And I've never bought the federal overreach argument to begin with. What did the other premiers have to say about that?
Yeah. All premiers want the federal government to stay out of their jurisdiction. They all hate the spending power of the federal government. They would all rather the federal government give them money and they would do their own thing without strings attached. And basically making the federal government just an instrument of money delivery as opposed to program delivery. So that is totally consistent. That's one of the reasons why the premiers now meet separately from the prime minister in most cases, because they can put their list together. And it's usually, we need more money for healthcare. Even though it's our jurisdiction, you need to give us more money, but don't tell us what to do with the money because we're smarter than you are. And so that's been an ongoing fight. That's something that unifies all the premiers. And so typically the issues that divide them, like interprovincial disputes, like this pipeline, they tend to soften their message and focus on what unifies them, which is federal government, stay out of our business except writing us checks.
So essentially, the general approach to this is consistent with previous Western premiers.
Yeah, not just Western premiers, but
right.
the Confederation, the Federation as well. Like
But
anytime premiers meet, this is what happens.
But the details have changed. We'll say,
Yes.
so stay tuned for what happens next because this is just the warm up.
Right. And so where Smith talks about no export taxes, which is a new argument, even though that is in federal jurisdiction, an export tax, stay out of that as it relates to oil and gas. Scott Moe agrees, but in his case, it's about potash. And so what they're saying is the federal government stay out of provincial jurisdiction and federal government stay out of federal jurisdiction on things that we don't like.
Well, good luck to them. Duane, thank you as always, and we'll look forward to the next chat because these issues aren't going away.
No. Okay. Thanks, Marco.